Hello, welcome to Tech Talk. My name is Matt Knight, and I am the Facilities and Training Coordinator for Access Humboldt. And I'm here with Juan Carrillo, who is
Hi.
Production Manager for Access Humboldt. Hi, Juan.
Hi.
And as you can probably tell, we are in discrete locations. He's at home, and I am here in the office in the sweltering Access Humboldt control room. But we won't go too far into But today we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into video conferencing. It's something that people have been asking us about a lot, and of course this is kind of the new world that we're all living in. Is we're all socially distanced and separated, and so a lot of people are trying to find solutions to do the things they did before COVID came along, and so we're going to try and help out a little bit with that. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is tips and etiquette for making your Zoom or Skype call the best it can be. And a lot of this is just really common sense and maybe stuff that you wouldn't think about, but it's going to help improve things, I think, a lot. And I think the very first thing you could do to make your call the best is probably locate your router or locate as close to your router as possible if you're using Wi-Fi. If you're, in another part of the building, you've got a refrigerator and a block wall and some other stuff between you and your router, then you're going to probably find that you're going to have signal degradation, and it may not look as good as it could. And I guess if, the very, very best way, and Juan, maybe you could talk a little bit about this, is to connect directly to your router using a cable, I think.
Yeah, so the top two considerations to think about when finding a place to set up is going to be your connectivities. So wired, if you can wire up to your router, or your Wi-Fi signal strength and your lighting. So those are the top two things, followed closely by whether it's quiet or not quiet enough to work in. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Connecting to the router or to a network switch via a Cat 5 or 6 cable to your laptop or desktop is the best way to make sure that you're going to have a reliable signal. And if that's not available, then getting as close to the access point, the wireless access point, is going to be your next best bet. So just be mindful of that as you're looking at spaces, whether you're at your house or if you're, in another location. Maybe you are still going into the office, but maybe your office is far from the access point, so you might want to just move around to a different location to see if it helps the signal strength.
Yeah. And then I think probably the next thing you're going to want to do is just take a look at the other internet uses that are going on in the house, right? I mean, if somebody is playing games online or watching a movie or something, that could cut into your bandwidth fairly seriously and really degrade what your picture is going to look and sound is going to look like.
For sure, yeah, that's a great point. The time of day, probably, I guess everyone's kind of home now, so you might be finding over bandwidth. So scheduling around important calls is, critical.
Right. And you mentioned, you alluded to this too, is also find a quiet space in your house that's close to your router as possible, hopefully away from the street and any noisy distractions that might be going on outside. If somebody's got a leaf blower or something going, you want to try and get as far away from that as possible. So whatever available light source, we may have talked about this in the last, but we see this a lot in video conferencing, where people have the light coming from behind them. And that has a tendency to backlight them and just make it look like a shadow talking. So I think one of the things you're going to want to make sure that you do is you have your light source coming from in front of you, not from the side, not from behind. So that means not locating with yourself behind a window or that's open, or otherwise you're just going to be a dark, mysterious shadow, and people won't be able to see your face.
Yeah, that's probably the most common lighting mistake that we see is people sitting in front of a window. I think they think because our eyes, when we're looking at the window, it's like, oh, it looks really nice outside. You know, it'll be nice for people. That's a nice background to have. It'll be nice for people to see that behind me. But the cameras that we use are just not, they don't have the dynamic range to be able to expose for you in front of a really bright window. So what it tries to do is it'll expose for the window so you get really dark. Or it might be vice versa. It might be that it actually exposed for the person, but then the window is just a big white, like blown out blob. So. Yeah.
And then I guess the other thing is you want to frame yourself as best as possible, and by that we mean you don't want your chin down here on the bottom of the picture. You want to have your head as close to the top of the frame as possible, especially if you're going to be doing things like inserting things like we call lower thirds, which is basically names that go underneath you to identify you and your guests. You want to make sure that they're all set up so it doesn't go across their mouth or their nose or anything else like that. So you want to be, far away from the camera so that you're not dominating it, but close enough that you fill the picture correctly, I guess.
Yeah, those are all great tips that I kind of make myself a little checklist before that I go through before meetings, and it's essentially everything you just said. Just make sure the framing is appropriate. The camera, everyone's cameras are slightly different depending on the device that you're using as well. So it might be, you might notice that moving from a laptop to an iPad to your phone, the framings, depending on like the lens, you might need to push that that device further away or closer. So just kind of keep in mind, like for me, I'm using a desktop, but I'm using a Logitech camera that has a really wide angle. So that's why you can see there's much more space. We're probably using very similar cameras, except you have a slightly different model that's a little more cropped in. So that's something to keep in mind. But if you can, try to have your camera at eye level. So if you're on a laptop, you might want to stack a couple books underneath it to bring the laptop up. That way it looks like you're kind of looking at your audience and not like looking down or looking up.
I mentioned that, and that is one of the hardest things to do, is because naturally your eyes are drawn down towards the picture of the person that you're talking
right.
to, and then you look like you're not paying attention or something. It's so hard to look right into that camera. I find myself doing it all the time, but
yeah.
If you look into the camera, then you're going to look like you're looking at the people that you're talking to. So,
right.
And then just moving on to etiquette, probably what I've noticed, especially in Zoom calls, is that if somebody doesn't mute their microphone, that any sort of background noise will tend to take the camera away from the speaker. And so if somebody closes a door at your location or something, or says something to you over your shoulder, then you'll be on, and the person who's talking will be momentarily taken away from the recording. So I really suggest that if you are in a big call like that, is that you mute your microphone, wait to answer, and then open your microphone when you're called upon. It's probably going to make the whole experience better for everybody.
Yeah, definitely. That happens frequently in larger groups. So like right now we're just having a one-on-one call, so it's not so much of an issue. But once you have 5, 6, 10 people in a call, you will get those accidental microphone pickups from other things happening in the environment. So you do want to be mindful of that. And I know in Zoom there's a shortcut on the keyboard where you can mute your microphone, and then you can tap and hold spacebar, and it'll open up the microphone for you to speak. Then you can let go of it, and it'll close it back up. I'm not sure about Skype, but they probably have something similar.
That's a great tip. Yeah, I did not know about that. That's terrific. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I think is probably a good way to handle it if you're in a large group in a Zoom call is raise your hand to be recognized. And by raising your hand, I don't mean going like this. I mean using there's emoticons or emojis that are down in the menu, and if you can raise your hand using that, and then whoever's conducting the call, maybe it's you that's conducting it, and then you can kind of see who wants to speak or respond to a question, and maybe just make a note of that and then go to them instead of just breaking in, because crosstalk is a killer. If people start talking over each other, it's just a mush. So that muting your mic and raising your hand to speak, I think, are probably a really polite way of handling it, and just a practical way of handling a Zoom yourself in this call.
For sure. I have one more etiquette tip, which is be mindful of your camera, right? So this is one thing that I've noticed. Sometimes people forget, like if maybe they're trying to show an object, or for example, I've seen like the Pledge of Allegiance been done in various situations, and people are not mindful of where that camera is pointing. So they stand up, and so then all of a sudden we're just staring at someone's belt buckle. So it's be mindful of where your camera is placed and positioned. That way you can avoid some funny moments, I guess. And then another one is in Zoom, under video settings, it does have this there's a couple of settings in there that are worth kind of mentioning. One is enable HD. If you have the bandwidth, you can hit that button and it'll actually send out a higher resolution image. And on some cameras, it actually also widens the field of view. So for the regular setting, Zoom actually crops in on the image a little bit, and it's a smaller resolution. And when you enable HD, it'll give you the full sensor of your camera. So that might be worth playing around, checking. It depends on the resolution of your camera. I think it defaults to 720p, but if you have a 1080p camera and you notice that maybe it's a little tight, it's probably because that's not enabled. And you can enable that, and it'll give you the full readout. You can also check recording settings in there, I believe, where you can tell it to record in a couple of different formats. A format that's a little easier to work with for editing purposes. It can also record like individual audio tracks for each person if you're going to edit that back in. So there's some cool stuff in there to look into if later on we're going to talk about podcasting, and so those could be good tools to have. That way you have isolated tracks for individual people. Right.
And I think if you are in a situation where what's critical is the audio portion of it, and you're having problems, I guess turning your camera off is a great way of giving the more bandwidth to the audio, because the audio uses a very small amount of bandwidth compared to the camera. Especially if you are in that HD setting, it's really going to start hogging bandwidth. If that's important, if it's important that you have an image there, then you might have to work something else out. But if it's just the audio that you're interested in, just there's no reason to have the camera on unless you absolutely need it.
For sure, that's an excellent point. I have run into a situation where the connection was pretty bad, and made the mistake of keeping the video on where we should have shut the video off because the video ended up being unusable pretty much. So it was kind of pointless to keep recording the video, and we should have prioritized the audio and then gotten better audio, because the audio was pretty compressed because there wasn't enough bandwidth, so it just crunches everything down. Yeah. So that's a great point.
Well, that happened to me today. That's why I brought it up. We do a show here called North Coast Journal Preview, and Thad was in a different location, and he was having a lot of problems, and so we just turned off his camera, and we got the audio And so we just decided to go with that, and we're just going to put a picture in. And that's another thing you can do is if you don't have the video, or if it's just terrible, you can just take a headshot and substitute it for the video. And most people don't really care that much about that. But
yeah, that's a great tip.
So the other thing that I find would probably work well is because Zoom, especially, and I'm sure Skype too, has a bit of a reaction time sometimes, depending on what your connection's like. If you lead with your name when you answer a question, if you say, "This is Matt from Access Humboldt, and here's my answer," it gives the camera a chance to catch up with you. And it's on you for your answer, and the name is really just a way of waking the camera up to the fact that you're talking. So it doesn't always happen, but sometimes it seems like it misses a beat, or it's a half a second behind or a second behind. So that might be a good way of, and it might feel a little repetitious, but I think it's good, just to re-identify yourself, especially if there are no lower thirds or anything else involved, and people like, okay, who's talking now? So if you re-identify yourself, it serves a couple of purposes there.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you used to do just phone conference calls. People used to have to identify themselves that way. So I think that's a good tip and great etiquette. I think when you see a lot of that kind of late camera switching, oftentimes it's because there's a couple of microphones open. I think that's what's going on. So that's another reason why it's helpful to mute your mic, because it'll help minimize that. It'll certainly be faster than if 3 or 4 people have their microphones open. So because it's kind of like trying to listen out to see if anyone's speaking. So yeah, another good tip.
The other thing, just 2 more things, and then we're going to move on to some gear. The reaction comments to when people are talking, like exclamations or gasps or cheers or noise of acknowledgement, are going to take that camera away from whoever's talking. So it's hard, because in an ordinary conversation, it's kind of, we're hardwired to want to affirm when people are talking and just show that we're engaged and show that we're listening. But in the Zoom world, it just tends to confuse things. So along with, if your mic isn't muted, it should be muted. But if it isn't, just be mindful that if you say or hey, that's great, or what have you, then we're going to lose whoever's talking, at least their picture. So something to think about. And then finally, this is one that's good for any sort of production that you do, live, Zoom, or whatever, is just make sure that your cell phone is muted. You'll get the cell phone will go off, and you'll see everybody reach down and was that my phone? They're all checking their phone, and so it kind of get that herd thing. And the other thing that I've been hearing, and maybe you can talk about this, is little signals that you would get from either windows or chimes or what have you, and how you can stop those from interrupting as well.
Yeah, so on Windows, it kind of varies depending on which version of Windows you're using. Some of the older versions don't have the ability to silence notifications or system sounds, so I can't speak directly to that. But I know the newer versions do have a silence notification feature. Usually you can engage that. I don't even know what it's called anymore. It's not the system tray, but it's like in like the notification pane or something. You can toggle those on and off. And same with Mac OS in the upper right hand corner. That one I can't speak about. There's a little button that you can click. It's in the upper right hand corner, and then if you scroll down, it actually scrolls the menu, pulls it down, and there's a do not disturb function. And engaging that will silence all notifications from, if your email's running in the background, you won't hear those chimes of new email. Or if you're getting text messages through your computer, it'll silence those as well. So that is a great tip, is to look into silencing notifications on whatever device you're using, whether it's a laptop or if it's a phone or it's a iPad. almost all of them have a way of muting notifications.
Cool. All right, so next I think we're going to talk about new products and gears and maybe some of the essentials that you might want to invest in to make your video conferencing calls a little more streamlined and a little easier to manage. And if you're using these as a production tool, ways to capture them and move them around and manage them.
Yeah, so because there's been such an influx of people, doing live streams, a lot of the kind of like the well-known devices have kind of gone out of stock. So it's become really difficult to purchase some of the nicer higher end like video capture devices. Like the Elgato has a CamLink device. It's around $100, $150. So people have now been like looking around for alternatives, and there's been some interesting kind of finds that I've kind of come across. We'll start with audio capture. So like audio capture, there's a couple of ways of doing it. Typically, it's going to involve some kind of audio interface. So that would be a USB interface that you could connect a microphone to, or it might have a couple of different inputs. So depending on your use case, depending on what you're trying to do, if you're trying to capture a microphone, or if you're trying to capture, say, a line, you need a line in. If you're trying to do like a DJ show, or maybe you're producing some other kind of, I'm not sure, maybe you're pulling something out of a mixer and it's sending in a line in. The cheapest and most easy to use device that I have found is this Digit Now capture device. So it would be this device here. And so it's just a little USB dongle, and it terminates in a pair of RCA ins, and it also has a male mini 3.5 millimeter jack. So you can plug that into, like a headphone socket of a tape deck or something like that. So this was made so that you can actually rip vinyl from turntables or rip old tapes by plugging it into like a Walkman. But it comes with a couple of adapters, and you can really plug anything in that that ends in RCA male. So that's mixers or other line level instruments, and it comes with a little adapter for that male 3.5 millimeter jack. So I found this to be really versatile. Like I said, originally it was designed for just capturing audio from other devices, consumer devices, but I've been plugging it into a mixer, and anything that I plug into that mixer, whether it's microphones or other instruments, gets patched through. So then I can bring that in as a source in Zoom or Skype. And it's like a $20 adapter. And like I said, this is one of the cheapest solutions that I have found, and it requires like no drivers for Mac. I think Windows there's a driver, but it automatically installs it, so it's literally plug and play. Some of the other kind of more expensive devices might require a driver if it's not class compliant, and they're nicer if you're just trying to plug in like an XLR microphone directly, and you don't need to have another mixer in order to do that. But they are significantly more expensive. So I've been testing these, and they've been really reliable. They don't have too much noise in them. It has a pretty clean signal. So for me, I think it, for the price, it certainly is definitely worth it. Then video. So if you're trying to capture video, like bring in, say, a DSLR camera or another or any other kind of device that sends out HDMI. This is an alternative to, say, a CamLink. This works over USB 2.0. So it's not the fastest connection, and you are going to have some limitations. For example, here, I believe it caps out at 30 frames per second. So 30 frames per second is probably more than enough for a Zoom call, and even for YouTube runs at 30 frames per second. So you're not going to be, it has a 60 frames per second mode that you can upload to, but Most of it is 30 frames per second video, so you'll be fine there. And I believe it caps out at 1080p as the max resolution output, which still, for most of us, I think that's going to be plenty. So this will allow you to connect, a DSLR or a camcorder, and it shows up in Zoom or in Skype as a camera input, right? So it shows up as a webcam essentially. So then you, instead of using a webcam, you can use a fairly, nice lens and big sensor, and so you'll get better low light performance. You'll get shallow depth of field that Matt is simulating. You can probably get that for real, with like an actual lens, if that's what you wanted to do. So it does provide a very clean, nice image. Now I ordered this, so this will get here I think on Friday, so I'll be able to run some tests on it. But everything I've read so far, people are having good experiences with it. Now this is a generic, essentially generic Chinese manufactured device, so you will find it sold by like many different vendors with different names, so it doesn't actually have a name. And on Amazon you'll see that it's like there's just a whole bunch of copies of that same device, but this is kind of almost all of them have this exact same writing and layout, so you just want to double check the specs, and almost all the specs are the same. I have noticed, again, because of the shortage of this, some of the vendors that are charging a little bit more will get it to you fairly quick, and it's the price range that I've seen are between $16 to $50, so it's quite a large price range. I bought a pair off of them on eBay for $16.99 each, but the shipping was going to be almost a month, so those are still on their way. And then I ended up buying this one for $30, but I should be getting it here by Friday. So it just kind of depends. You can pay a little bit more and get it sooner, or pay less and just kind of wait it out. Depends on how fast you need it. But once I have it, I'll test it. But with both of these devices, essentially you could have be using some really high-end equipment and patching that through into Skype, or YouTube, or any other service essentially that will accept an input or a camera input and a third-party microphone input.
Okay, so let's take a look at some USB headsets, which I think is something that everybody should have in their toolkits for this sort of thing.
Yeah, so when we're doing these types of calls, there's quite an assortment of ways of actually doing this. And so what I propose we do is I'm going to talk about essentially 3 setups, and then I wanted to actually change my audio to those setups. That way we have a reference of what those setups can sound like. Okay. And then just kind of generally talk about maybe what you get at different price points. So I'm going to, so let me just introduce the 3 setups. One is it's a headset and microphone combination, right? So it's like a headset and it's got a microphone. Those can run anywhere between tens of dollars to $100, over $100, depending on the quality that you're gonna be looking for. The one that I have here is it's a bit of a hybrid. It's a little more expensive, but it's still within that same kind of form factor. It's a pair of headphones and a boom mic that comes out. Next, it's like a wireless headset. So like I have a pair of like Apple Airpods. These connect to via Bluetooth. So again, there's a bunch of different types of these, and they run. Those tend to be more expensive. You're looking probably between $40, $30 maybe for some lower end ones, and then they go like really expensive. And then lastly, it's going to be a more modular setup, which is just a pair of headphones, and it could be any pair of headphones, and a dedicated microphone. And here, which I'm going to lift mine up. I'm using one of these blue microphones. I'm not sure. Are you using one of these as well?
I've got a analog AKG sitting.
Yeah, so that's kind of what we're doing right now. So we have this kind of modular setup where we have a dedicated microphone that feeds, our voice gets patched in, and then we have a pair of headphones to kind of so that we can monitor the sound, and that way we're not getting any kind of feedback or or the speakers feeding back into the microphone and causing echo. So if you're experiencing echoing or the weird kind of echoing in your calls or feedback, more than likely it's because it's picking up the speaker sound back into the microphone. So wearing a set of headphones is the best way to eliminate that. So if you're running into that, try wearing some headphones and see if that helps. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to the Bluetooth headset so that we can start there, and then after that I'm going to go to the headset with the boom mic, and then we'll come back around. So give me one moment. I'm going to switch over to these real quick. Okay, so now I'm wearing these wireless little Airpods. So these are just wireless headphones with a little microphone stem on them. So these are, a lot of people use these with their phones. It's kind of like a Bluetooth headset. And so I'm sure you can hear the difference in the quality. It's way more compressed. Like it's probably a lot more thinner. What other characteristics do you notice from this map?
Just the bottom end has kind of disappeared, and it's just, and there's not much top end either. It's just very, very MIDI. I mean, it's in the acceptable range. You could work with that, and I think it would be fine. But it's not quite as full as the microphone, as the Eddie microphone.
Yeah. So this is I kind of tell everyone to kind of work with what they have first. So they might already have a pair of these kind of hanging around. And so this will probably be a little bit better than just the built-in microphone on the laptop and then you still get the flexibility of like moving around, like if you need to move around a little bit. So, it's not too bad and they're fairly convenient, but Bluetooth. Sorry, go ahead. I
was going to say, you see people using the wired version of that, the older wired version.
Yeah, I would probably recommend the wired version if possible, because I find that most Bluetooth devices tend to be finicky, especially like right now connecting these up. It took like a couple of tries before they actually connected. Yeah. So going wired is probably always going to be better, in my opinion.
Unless you're up to Bluetooth, then it's something you use a lot. The frustration factor probably is going to be better if you use something you just plug in. Right. Yeah. So now I'm going to switch over to the headset with the boom mic, and I'll explain. I'll give a little bit of context as far as like what this headset is, because it is a little bit different, but the concept is still the same. So this has a long wire, and I'll plug this into my desktop here, and then I should be able to select that in my software here, and you'll be hearing this microphone, and I'll be hearing you through these headphones. So give me 1 second, and I'll do that. I just wanted to say, well, as long as you're holding that up, I noticed that it doesn't terminate in a USB connection, but it terminates in a micro plug connection. Is there or what's the advantage or disadvantage?
So it would probably be better, in my opinion, or probably easier to operate if it was USB, because not all of the computers, desktops or laptops will accommodate this type of connection where it carries a microphone and also, sends out the speaker or the headphone in one plug. So you might need an adapter for your computer. So this is you kind of have to know exactly what your computer is capable of to use this plug. And it's a plug that's very confusing because people automatically assumes like, oh well, it'll just work. It's the same, it fits in the in the port, so it should work. But this is where you kind of get into like the details of what's a TRS tip versus a TRRS tip. So tip ring sleeve, tip ring sleeve, and the way that those are configured. And not all the devices use the same configuration of how they map those connectors. So it is a little bit more of you have to know kind of what your devices are capable of. So if it terminates on a USB, it's a little more straightforward because then it's just a USB connector and it automatically will, you can select it to send out to USB headphones and it'll, select the USB input for the microphone. So, but I do happen to know that it does work with this computer because I've tested it before. So we'll hear that now. Excellent. Okay, so now I'm using this headset, and again, there's a whole bunch online that you could purchase with slightly various different qualities to the tone of the mic and to the output of the headphones. But generally, the form factor, this is kind of what it looks like and how it operates. It's fairly straightforward. This headset, this is like a pair of DJ headphones that I have, and this particular boom microphone I bought separately. It's a V-Moda Boom Pro, and I'll give you the link to that so you can put that up. But it's just a little microphone attachment that you could, if your headphones have a detachable wire, you can plug in this boom microphone into the headphones, and then the microphone itself carries the microphone into your computer via the 3.5 millimeter port. So it's just a little bit of it's just a third party attachment that you can add to any pair of headphones that has a detachable connector or cable connector. So that's something like I think it's Audio Technica has a pair of microphone or a pair of headphones called I think it's the M50s or something. I can send you the link to those as well. But it doesn't have to be that pair, but any other microphone that has a detachable cable will work.
So what I'm getting from you is that this is not actually a complete product. This is something that adds on to an existing.
Yeah, this boom microphone in particular. So I just wanted to be clear that this particular headset did not come assembled the way that it is now. I bought an attachment for it, but you can just buy one that already has a boom microphone. You don't have to do that. That'd probably be easier. This is just more like if you already happen to have a pair of headphones that would be compatible with it, you can just add a microphone to it.
How much are you talking about for something like that?
So it's $30 for this boom microphone, so it's not terribly expensive. And from all the reviews that I read, everyone was saying that this is probably one of the better boom microphones to purchase. And
it sounds really, really good.
Yeah, it does, right? So I tested it with my siblings the other day, and I was kind of asking them, how if they could hear me okay, and they're like, yeah, it sounds really good. And so for $30, I think it's a great it's a great add-on, especially if you already have a pair of headphones that would be compatible with it. And even if you have if you don't have a pair of headphones that are compatible with it, but maybe you're trying to price out or figure out which way to go. Hopefully this gives you an idea of what this sounds like, and then you can make an informed decision. And so, and now I'm going to switch back to my regular setup, which is what we're using.
I just wanted to say one thing about the headphone setup. And if you are somebody who maybe not comfortable with using an external microphone, it's just like a lot to think about as far as placement and all that kind of thing. A headset is going to get the mic the correct distance from your mouth right? And you don't really have to think about that distance. It's always going to be the same. So every time you go to that headset mic, it's going to sound exactly the same. There's not going to be varying qualities of it. So to me, that's one of the big advantages of that kind of setup.
For sure, absolutely. And another reason why there's that that kind of difference in tone in like the tone of our voices is because like the small ones, the little Bluetooth ones, the microphone is like way back here, right? Because it's kind of behind your mouth by your ear. There's just more distance between the source and then the pickup, the actual microphone. And this one brings it around much closer to your mouth, allowing it to pick up a much fuller, fuller signal.
And it could also, if you are in a particularly noisy spot, I always tell my students in field certification, the first thing about microphones is to mind the gap. The farther away you are from your mic is from its subject, the more chance it's got to pick up room, other extraneous noises that are going on. So when you've got this kind of setup, then chances are most of the sound is going to be going into it from your mouth and not from the lawnmower next door.
Correct. So now we're back to the base level. So the Blue microphones, or some of these kind of higher end USB microphones. This in particular microphone, which you'll put up the link to, this is a bit of a hybrid microphone. It will support XLR output out to like a regular XLR microphone would into like an analog board, or you can use it digitally. It has a USB connector at the bottom, connects to your computer, and it just shows up as an input device for your audio. The cool thing about these microphones is that they have different pickup patterns, so you can select the pickup pattern for the situation that you're in. In this case, it's just a cardioid, because one person talking to it. You can also set it in a figure 8 pattern if there's two people talking into the microphone, one on each side of the microphone, and also just omnidirectional if you just kind of want to have it pick up more of a room kind of pattern. Additionally, it allows for monitoring, so you can hear yourself a little bit. That's just kind of helpful, so you don't get this kind of like enclosed, muffled kind of feeling when you have a pair of headphones on. Sometimes it's kind of it makes it a little bit hard to figure out how loud you're talking. You're talking really loud because you have a pair of headphones on. It also has.
Well, go ahead. I think you're going to probably mention the headphone jack.
Yeah. So it has a headphone jack, which my headphones are plugged in directly to, which gives you like zero latency monitoring, which is really important. And it has a couple of hardware knobs on the device itself. Most importantly, a mute button, so I can mute the microphone from the device itself and not have to do it in the software. So I don't have to reach out for the keyboard and mouse to do that. I can just tap the button here and it flashes red to indicate that it's mute. It also has a dedicated knob for the volume of the headphones and a dedicated knob for the actual gain of the microphone. So those are all really convenient things to have, especially if you're if you're podcasting regularly, or you're on conference calls frequently, and if it's appropriate for the situation, if you don't mind, like you can see the microphone in my shot because I have a little bit of a wider shot. If it's appropriate, then you can get away with using something like this and get excellent audio quality from it, with all the conveniences that it offers, with these onboard controls.
Yeah. Well, I think no matter what you use, as far as USB microphones go, chances are they're going to be slightly to way better than what's on your computer. The computer microphones are usually sort of an afterthought that the developers put on there. But this will have, most microphones are going to have a larger diaphragm. They're going to have a much better range of pickup. They won't sound quite as tinny. And then, especially if you've got it in a sort of holder or a mic stand, you're not going to have, if you're typing on your keyboard while you're talking, everybody's going to know about it. So you're getting the microphone away from your computer keyboard, and that can be really useful.
For sure, yeah, those are things to consider, when selecting the microphone, and just to follow up on like some of the tips that we discussed as far as the camera or the video portion of it, such as the framing. We're saying, well, you might have to like move your device further away. Well, that's going to move your onboard microphone further away too, right? So that's why it is nice to separate, the video and the audio. That way you can, it's more flexible. In all of these instances that we showed you, it brings the microphone closer to you. So it doesn't really matter if the laptop is propped up and a little bit further away, because you'll have something else that's closer, microphone wise.
Well, that's going to be, I think that's all we've got time for. That was a lot. And I just want to say, Access Humboldt is here to try and help you with these problems. You can always send us an email at info@accesshumboldt.net and ask a question. We may or may not be able to answer. We can always dig for it and see if we can come up with it. And then be sure and check out accesshumboldt.net, look at our website, and you can see what we've been up to and all the things that we offer to Humboldt County. And Juan, thanks so much for being here. That was a lot, but I appreciate you hanging with us, and we'll do it again in 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, for sure. That was a lot of fun. Thank you.